My family never understood me. I spent my whole life feeling like I was just there, doing everything for them, but always invisible in their eyes. It was never enough to be the responsible one, the one who kept things together. They didn't care about what I did. They didn't even acknowledge the sacrifices I made. But that night at the dinner table, when my father, Elijah, casually said, "You are not invited to your brother's birthday party. You should have brought wine," I realized I'd been fooling myself all these years. This wasn't just about a birthday party. This was about the years of neglect, the endless expectations, and the hurt that I'd been swallowing for far too long. It was the moment I snapped. For once, I wasn't going to stay silent. I wasn't going to let them treat me like an afterthought anymore. Everything changed that night, and trust me, when I spoke up, no one at that table would ever look at me the same way again. As I sat there, staring at my father and my brother, I couldn't help but replay all the years that had led me to this point. I thought about how, for as long as I could remember, I had always been the one to take care of everything for the family. From the moment I could walk, I felt like I was expected to step into a role that no one ever bothered to explain. I was always the quiet one, the one who stayed out of the spotlight and made sure everything behind the scenes ran smoothly. While Nathan, my younger brother, was the star of every family gathering, I was the one making sure the plates were filled, the bills were paid, and the house was kept together. He got all the attention, the praise, the new gadgets and clothes. I got ignored. But it wasn't just about the material things. No one ever asked me how I was doing. No one ever asked if I was happy. My parents, Elijah and Martha, seemed too busy basking in Nathan's achievements to even notice I was in the room. Elijah would often talk about how proud he was of Nathan for his latest school award or promotion at work, and all I could do was sit there, silently nodding. I was happy for Nathan, I truly was, but it hurt more than they would ever understand. What hurt more, though, was how my father would always downplay my efforts. It was like no matter what I did, it was never enough. I was never the one who got the congratulations, never the one who was told, "Thank you." When I worked hard to organize family events or help with finances, it was expected, not appreciated. I never needed praise, but I needed recognition. I needed to feel like I mattered, but no one ever seemed to notice. Nathan, on the other hand, had it easy. He was always the golden child. Elijah showered him with praise for the smallest things when he got a promotion at his job, when he showed up for a family dinner looking sharp in his new clothes. Nathan never had to lift a finger to gain our parents' affection. They'd do everything for him, and he'd sit back, soaking it all in. I remember one specific night that stung in a way that's hard to describe. It was Nathan's high school graduation, and I had spent the entire week helping him with his preparations, organizing family travel, arranging the venue, making sure everything was perfect. My parents were so caught up in the excitement of Nathan's big day that they didn't notice I was running on empty. When it was finally time for dinner, they barely acknowledged how much work I had done. Elijah handed Nathan an envelope with money and a congratulatory hug, while I was told, "Good job, sweetheart," with a smile that didn't quite meet his eyes. I remember feeling so small that night. It was like I wasn't even a part of my own family's story. I had always been the one to support them, to be the rock they leaned on, but all I got in return was the sense that I wasn't seen. It was a feeling I had come to accept as my reality, even if it hurt every single day. But that night, the night of Nathan's birthday party, it all clicked. For years, I had let it go, pretending I was okay with being overlooked, pretending I didn't need recognition or love. But deep down, I felt the weight of it all. And when Elijah spoke those words, those simple, cutting words about not being invited and should have brought wine, it was as if a switch flipped. The anger and frustration I had buried for so long came rushing to the surface. How could they do this to me? How could they take everything I'd given and throw it back in my face with such casual cruelty? And why had I put up with it for so long? That night, I realized I didn't have to live this way anymore. I didn't have to be the silent, invisible daughter. I didn't need their approval. I had been more than enough for them. And it was time to stop pretending I wasn't. The days after the dinner table incident were blurry. I couldn't focus at work, and I barely slept. I kept replaying Elijah's words over and over in my head, trying to make sense of everything. That one moment, that single comment, had torn down the facade of my family, exposing everything I had been too blind to see for years. For the first time in my life, I felt a burning need for answers, even if it meant digging into places I had long avoided. It was a Friday afternoon when it happened. I was cleaning out an old box of family mementos my grandmother had left me after her passing. She'd always been the one person who treated me like I mattered, the one who saw the value in my quiet support. I had kept this box tucked away in my closet for months, unable to bring myself to go through it. But now, I needed something to distract me, something that wasn't related to the ache in my chest. As I sifted through old photos, yellowing letters, and trinkets from my childhood, something caught my eye. A letter, sealed in an envelope with my name on it, stood out from the rest. It was in my grandmother's handwriting, delicate but precise. My heart skipped a beat as I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the paper. "Dear Debbie," it began, and my eyes immediately misted. The letter felt like a lifeline to a time when things had been simpler. My grandmother had been a constant source of warmth, but as I read, the warmth was replaced with something cold, a realization that hit me like a slap. She spoke of the family trust, the one I had never known much about, and of Elijah's handling of the money. My grandmother hinted that Elijah had been siphoning funds from the trust for years, but she had never been able to prove it. She wrote that she had tried to make sure the money was used properly, but after her passing, the trust would be in the hands of Elijah and my father's decision-making, and something wasn't right. Her words were vague, but the implication was clear. Elijah had been mismanaging the trust and using it for his own benefit, specifically to fund Nathan's extravagant lifestyle. I could hardly breathe as I finished reading the letter. The entire world felt like it had tilted on its axis. I hadn't imagined that the financial mismanagement in our family went beyond simple neglect. It was deliberate. Elijah wasn't just ignoring me. He was taking from the very legacy of the family and giving it all to Nathan. I felt a sickening mix of disbelief and rage settle in my stomach. How long had this been going on? Had I been so blinded by the years of emotional neglect that I hadn't noticed the financial deception? For as long as I could remember, Nathan had been the one receiving all the praise, all the gifts, all the attention. But now I realized that it wasn't just about him being the golden child, he was the golden child, because Elijah had been feeding his lavish lifestyle with money that wasn't even his to spend. I slammed the letter down on the table and stood up, pacing around my small apartment. My heart was pounding in my chest as anger coursed through me. For years I had been doing everything for my family, quietly supporting them, footing the bill when necessary, and watching as they showered Nathan with gifts and accolades. I had played the role of the dutiful daughter, expecting nothing in return. But now I understood. My father, my own flesh and blood, had been using our family's legacy to fuel Nathan's desires, while I was left picking up the pieces, unnoticed and unappreciated. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. It wasn't just the money. It was the years of being treated like I was invisible. I had been the one paying bills, organizing family events, and making sure everything ran smoothly. Yet, somehow, my family had always been blind to my contributions. Elijah and Nathan had seen me as a convenient tool, nothing more. I had been the one holding everything together, while they fed their own egos and lived their lives in oblivion. I couldn't shake the image of Nathan's smug face at the dinner table, grinning as my father praised him once again, never once acknowledging what I had done for the family. I felt sick to my stomach. How had I let it go on for so long? How had I allowed myself to be so insignificant in my own family? But now I knew the truth, and I couldn't unsee it. Elijah wasn't just emotionally neglecting me. He had been using my hard work, my sacrifices, and my time to enrich Nathan. He had turned me into a walking ATM while Nathan enjoyed the perks. It was a betrayal on every level. I walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. The quiet of the city below did nothing to soothe me. For years, I had been trying to fit into a mold my family had created for me, hoping that eventually they would see me, appreciate me, love me. But now, I knew I had been nothing more than a pawn in their twisted game, and I had been too naive to see it. The letter had given me the answers I had been seeking, but it also opened up a whole new set of questions. What did this mean for me? What was I going to do about it? Could I confront Elijah and Nathan about this? Could I finally stand up for myself? I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let them continue to manipulate me. I wasn't going to let my father's lies and Nathan's complacency dictate my life anymore. This wasn't just about money. This was about respect, recognition, and finally taking control of my own story. I grabbed my phone and dialed Ruth, my aunt who had always been a source of comfort and support. I needed to tell someone. And Ruth had always been the one person in the family who could see things clearly. She picked up on the second ring. "Debbie, what's going on?" she asked, her voice warm but concerned. "I found something," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "I need your help. I can't do this alone." Ruth listened as I explained everything: the letter, the trust, and my father's betrayal. She didn't interrupt, just let me spill it all out. When I finished, she sighed deeply. "Debbie, it's time you take control of your own life," she said softly. "We'll figure this out. I'll help you." Her words felt like a lifeline. Finally, I wasn't alone in this. I had someone who understood the weight of what I was dealing with, and together, we were going to get the answers I deserved. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope, a hope that I could break free from the suffocating grip my family had on me. It was time to confront them, and this time, I wasn't going to back down. In this chapter, Debbie begins to uncover the truth behind her family's manipulations, exposing the emotional and financial betrayal that has defined her relationship with her father and brother. This marks a turning point in her journey, as she starts to prepare herself to confront her family and reclaim her life. The silence in the apartment felt suffocating as I stared at the letter from my grandmother. The revelation that Elijah had been siphoning money from the family trust for Nathan's lavish lifestyle weighed heavily on my chest. My anger had bubbled up into something uncontrollable, something I knew I could no longer ignore. I couldn't just sit by and let this betrayal fester any longer. I had to confront Nathan, the golden child, the one who had always been praised, spoiled, and allowed to get away with everything. If anyone would understand, I thought, it would be him. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I was doing it because I wanted him to defend me, or because I wanted to expose him for what he really was, complicit in this toxic family dynamic. I didn't waste time. I picked up the phone and called Nathan. His voice came through with its usual casual tone, as though nothing in the world could faze him. "Hey, Deb, what's up?" he asked, the lightness in his voice somehow grating now. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about Dad and the family trust. I know what's been going on." There was a pause on the other end, a silence that seemed to stretch far too long. My pulse quickened as I waited for him to respond. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about," Nathan finally said, the coolness in his voice making my stomach tighten. "I haven't done anything." I exhaled, feeling the frustration rise again. He wasn't even trying to understand, wasn't even giving me the benefit of the doubt. "I found a letter from Grandma," I pressed, my voice tinged with the anger I couldn't hold back. "She left me some information about the trust, Nathan, and I know that Dad's been using it for you, siphoning money for your lifestyle. All these years, you've been living high while I've been left with the bills to pay for this family. Do you know what that feels like? Do you?" I could practically hear him rolling his eyes. "I didn't ask for any of that," Nathan replied dismissively. "I'm just living my life, and you're blowing things out of proportion, Deb. If Dad wants to give me money, it's not my fault." The words stung, each one landing like a slap across my face. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I had expected a reaction, something, anything, that showed he cared. But what I got was a cold indifference, as though he truly believed that none of this was his fault. "You've never once stood up for me," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of frustration and hurt. "You've never even acknowledged what I've been doing for this family. All these years, Nathan. I've been covering Dad's bills, making sure everything runs smoothly while you've gotten all the praise, all the gifts. How could you just let it happen?" There was another pause, and then his voice, calm as ever, broke the silence. "Look, Debbie, I didn't ask for any of it. You're just being overdramatic. Dad helps me out because that's what family does. And if you're upset about it, that's on you. I never told him to give me anything." The words hit harder than I could have imagined. Overdramatic? I was the one who had been there, picking up the pieces, supporting everyone when no one even thought to say thank you. I was the one who carried the weight of the family for years, with nothing to show for it except the constant feeling of being invisible. And now Nathan, the one person I thought might understand, was acting like it was all my fault. "You're completely missing the point," I said, my voice growing more firm, more angry. "This isn't about what you asked for. It's about how much I've given, how much I've sacrificed, and how little anyone seems to care. It's about how you've turned a blind eye to what's been going on, how you've just let Dad use me, manipulate me, and keep me in this corner while you get everything you want. It's about time you realize that you're part of this problem too. Nathan's response was just as cold, if not colder. Look, I don't have time for this, Deb. I'm busy, okay? I didn't ask for all that extra attention or the money. It's not my fault if you're upset. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to scream, to call him out for everything he had done, for everything he had let slide. But there was no point. He didn't care. He didn't understand. Maybe he never had. You know, Nathan, I said, my voice quieter now, tinged with the weight of the years of neglect. I thought you might stand by me in all this, but I was wrong. You've been just as complicit as Dad, and it hurts. You're supposed to be my brother, my family, but you've never had my back. Not once. There was no apology, no sign of remorse, just silence. I guess I'll see you around then, Nathan finally said. I have a meeting to get to. The call ended abruptly, and I sat there, my phone pressed to my ear, feeling more alone than I ever had. In that moment, it became clear to me that Nathan wasn't just blind to my struggles, he was indifferent to them. He wasn't the golden child I had once believed he was. He was simply another player in my father's manipulative game. I had been so desperate for his support, so desperate to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd come to my defense, but he never had. I placed my phone down, my heart heavy with a new kind of betrayal. It wasn't just Elijah who had failed me, it was Nathan too. The person I thought might be on my side, the person who I thought would understand my pain, had turned out to be just as selfish, just as blind to my needs as the rest of the family. My hands shook as I sat back against the couch, staring at the wall. My mind was racing, but it was hard to think clearly. The sense of betrayal, of being abandoned by the one person who was supposed to understand me, was overwhelming. Nathan hadn't just ignored my pain, he had dismissed it entirely. And it was worse than I could have ever imagined. I had been right all along. No one in my family truly saw me. No one cared about the sacrifices I made or the burden I carried. I was alone in this. And for the first time in my life, I realized that the only person who could change this was me. I wasn't going to be their doormat any longer. I wasn't going to keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. It was time to make them see me for once and for all. The truth had been sitting in front of me all along, hidden in the very records I never thought to examine. But now, with my grandmother's letter as the key, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The pieces of the puzzle I had spent years trying to make sense of why I had been overlooked, why I had been constantly pushed aside, were now falling into place. It wasn't just emotional neglect, it was financial manipulation, and Elijah had been at the center of it all. For the past few days, I had buried myself in old family records. My grandmother's letter had mentioned the family trust, but it had only scratched the surface. There was so much more to uncover. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I had worked for, everything I had given, had been exploited by my own father. His manipulation went far deeper than I had ever imagined. It was early Sunday morning when I found the first piece of concrete evidence. A series of bank statements, old ones, spanning back years, lay hidden in a manila folder under a stack of tax returns. The dates were clear. Fraudulent withdrawals had been made, funds redirected, and accounts manipulated. Elijah had been using the family trust to cover Nathan's lavish lifestyle, luxury cars, vacations, and high-end purchases that Nathan had never earned. The amounts weren't small either. Elijah had funneled thousands of dollars into Nathan's accounts, all while claiming he had nothing to give me, the one who had been holding the family together. I stared at the statements, my hands trembling. Each transaction felt like a punch to the gut. I had been covering bills, organizing events, and quietly paying for everything, while Elijah had been using the money meant for our family's future to indulge Nathan's every whim. It was betrayal beyond measure, one that hit harder than any of the emotional neglect I had suffered. Elijah had been using me, and now I had the evidence to prove it. My anger was a slow burn, simmering beneath the surface. But as I continued to dig, it only grew. I found more documents, property transactions, hidden loans, and even a series of wire transfers to offshore accounts. Elijah had been hiding money from everyone, diverting funds that could have been used to help me, to pay the bills that had always been mine to shoulder. He had manipulated me, and I had been too naive to see it. The final document was the most damning. A withdrawal made just last year, right before my birthday. Elijah had drained the trust, all while telling me he couldn't afford to help with anything. The withdrawal was to cover Nathan's latest extravagant purchase, a new house in the suburbs, paid for with money that didn't belong to him. I felt sick. Every moment of my life, every sacrifice I had made for this family, had been used to line Nathan's pockets and fund his endless desires. And Elijah had stood by, pretending it was all justified, pretending that I was the one who was wrong. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I had to confront him. I walked to my parents' house, the documents clenched tightly in my hand. The air felt thick as I approached the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Elijah was inside, probably watching one of his sports games, like he always did on Sunday afternoons. This time, though, there was no escaping the truth. I had the proof, and I was done being ignored. I entered without knocking, my footsteps heavy in the hallway. Elijah looked up from the television, his face lighting up when he saw me, but his smile faltered when he saw the folder in my hand. "What's this?" he asked, his voice low, the change in tone immediately sending a chill down my spine. "Open it," I said, my voice steady but thick with anger. Elijah's face twisted as he flipped through the pages. The shock on his face faded quickly, replaced by a tight-lipped smile that made my blood run cold. "You've been going through the family's finances?" he asked, his tone dismissive. "I've been going through everything," I replied, the bitterness in my voice clear. "I know what you've been doing. I know how you've been using the family trust to fund Nathan's lifestyle. You've been siphoning money for years, Elijah, all while telling me there's nothing left for me. Why? Why have you done this?" Elijah set the papers down, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand," he said, his voice colder now. "Nathan needs it more. He's been working hard, making something of himself. He deserves everything I've given him. And you've always been there, taking care of things. You never needed anything. Why make a fuss now?" I blinked in disbelief. "Nathan deserves everything? He doesn't even know the meaning of hard work. He's been given everything by you, and I've been the one doing all the work, paying the bills, keeping the house running, and getting nothing in return, and you've been giving him everything, all while letting me cover the costs. How could you justify that?" Elijah stood up, his eyes narrowing as he faced me. His cold demeanor only hardened. "It's family, Debbie. You're overreacting. It's not a big deal. Nathan's my son, and I'm giving him what he deserves. He's been doing well, and I wanted to make sure he had the best. You don't need anything from me. You've always been independent. This is just how things work." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "So, this is what you call family? Using me, draining me, and then pretending like it's all for Nathan's good? I've been nothing but the backup, the one you call when you need something done, and Nathan's too blind to see what's been happening. He's never once acknowledged everything. I've sacrificed for this family." Elijah's gaze softened, but there was no empathy in his eyes. "You'll never understand, Debbie. You're too emotional. This is just the way things are. Nathan is my responsibility. You never needed anything. I've given you everything you need, haven't I?" "No," I said, my voice trembling with fury. "You've given me nothing. Not once have you ever acknowledged me. Not once have you ever shown appreciation for what I've done. And now, I see you've been stealing from our future to fund Nathan's desires." Elijah's lips curled into a small, cruel smile. "You'll never be a part of this, Debbie. You'll never understand what family is truly about. Nathan will always come first, and well, you've always been on the outside." The words hung in the air like a bitter poison. I could feel the weight of them sinking deep into my chest. Elijah wasn't just dismissing me. He was telling me, point blank, that I would never matter. I would never be enough for him. And Nathan, he was just as much a part of the game as Elijah. I stood there, frozen, the betrayal of it all settling in like a stone in my stomach. I had spent my entire life trying to fit into their world, trying to earn their love and appreciation, but I would never have it. Not from Elijah, not from Nathan. As I turned to leave, Elijah's voice followed me. "You won't find peace by digging into things that don't concern you, Debbie." But I was already walking out the door. I had heard enough. The last thread of loyalty I had for my family snapped that day. I wasn't going to be their doormat anymore. The truth was out. And now, it was time for me to take control. The apartment felt suffocatingly quiet, the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside doing nothing to drown out the storm in my mind. It had been days since the confrontation with Elijah, but the words he had said still echoed in my ears. "You'll never be a part of this, Debbie." They were still ringing in my ears, and every time I thought about them, The knot in my stomach tightened. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing in particular, lost in thought. I had spent my entire life chasing approval from my family. I had given up so much my time, my energy, my happiness, all to earn their recognition, to feel like I was worth something to them. But all I had gotten in return was emotional neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. Elijah had used me, and Nathan had stood by, silent and complicit, receiving everything I had worked for without so much as a thank you. I couldn't take it anymore. I had lived in this house for years, trying to convince myself that my family still cared, that one day they would see me. I had convinced myself that my worth was tied to the role I played, the responsible one, the one who picked up the pieces and kept everything running. But the truth had hit me hard. My worth wasn't tied to what I did for them. It was tied to who I was, and my family had never seen that. They had used me, taken me for granted, and manipulated me into believing that I was nothing without them. The realization settled deep in my bones. I wasn't just tired of being overlooked anymore. I was done. Done with living in the shadow of their expectations. Done with being the one to hold everything together while they reaped the rewards. Done with trying to earn their love and recognition when they had never truly given it. I stood up and walked to the small bedroom that had been my sanctuary for years. The room felt different now, distant, foreign, as though it no longer belonged to me. I had spent so many nights in here, replaying the moments when I thought maybe, just maybe, things would get better. But nothing had changed. I had been waiting for a family that never existed, and the truth was, I didn't need them. I looked around at my belongings, clothes, books, photographs of a family that never truly saw me. For a long moment, I stood still, letting the weight of everything wash over me. All the years of emotional labor, of trying to prove my worth, of sacrificing my own happiness to be their pillar. And for what? To be told in so many words that I would never be enough? That I was an outsider in my own family? I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but it wasn't just pain, it was something else, something stronger. Anger. A deep, burning anger that had been festering for years, and now, finally, it had found its voice. I was no longer going to allow myself to be the doormat, no longer going to stay silent while they trampled over me. It was time to leave. I walked over to the closet and began pulling things off the shelves, packing them into a suitcase. There was a strange sense of calmness in my actions, as though I had made the decision long ago, and now my body was finally catching up to my mind. I folded clothes, packed books, and gathered my few belongings. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me of the life I had built outside of them, outside of their manipulation. This was mine. As I packed, memories flooded my mind. The years I had spent picking up the slack, covering their bills, managing every family event, all while being ignored. I had done everything for them. I had sacrificed my own needs and desires to make sure they were happy, comfortable, and never wanted for anything. But it had never been enough. They had never been grateful, never acknowledged my efforts. They had never seen me for who I was. I had spent my entire life living for them, and they had left me with nothing in return. The anger bubbled up again, stronger this time. I was angry at Elijah for using me, at Nathan for his silence, and at myself for not seeing it sooner, for not realizing that my happiness would never come from their approval. I was angry at the way I had allowed myself to be a victim for so long, believing that if I just worked harder, if I just gave more, they would finally see me. But they never did. I finished packing and zipped up my suitcase, the finality of the action hitting me in the chest. This was it. I was done. Done with the emotional abuse, done with the neglect, done with trying to earn a place in a family that never saw my worth. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, looking at the house that had once felt like home. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt suffocating, like a cage I had built for myself. I wasn't just walking away physically. I was walking away emotionally, too. I wasn't going to stay tied to this family, to their expectations, to their manipulation. I was breaking free, for good. As I stepped into the hallway, I paused. The house was eerily quiet. Elijah was probably still watching his game, and Nathan, well, I wasn't sure where he was. The thought of confronting either of them one last time crossed my mind, but I knew better. There was nothing left to say. I had said everything I needed to say in that confrontation with Elijah. They had made it clear that I was nothing more than a tool for them to use. They didn't deserve an explanation. They didn't deserve my time. I walked out the front door, suitcase in hand, and into the cool evening air. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom that was almost overwhelming. My chest felt lighter, my heart lighter, as though a weight had been lifted. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their validation. I was enough on my own. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew one thing: I was going to find a life for myself. A life where I was seen, where I was valued, and where I didn't have to sacrifice myself for anyone. This was my life now, my journey, and I was finally ready to walk it alone. The morning after I left, the world felt different. The air felt lighter, though still heavy with the weight of everything I had left behind. My hands trembled slightly as I sipped my brag, coffee, staring out the window of the small apartment I had rented. I didn't know why I had chosen this place. It wasn't much, just a modest one-bedroom with faded beige walls and a small kitchen that barely fit the essentials. But as I sat there, the quietness felt like the first real peace I had felt in years. The truth was, I had never lived alone before. I had always been either at home with my family or sharing space with a friend or partner. Now, I was on my own. The silence of the apartment was both comforting and unsettling. There was no one around to tell me what to do, no expectations hanging over me. For the first time in years, I was free from the constant pressure of trying to please everyone. But it wasn't easy. There were days when the quiet was overwhelming. I would find myself wandering from room to room, unsure of what to do with myself. The weight of loneliness would settle in like an old friend, reminding me of the years I had spent isolated, despite always being surrounded by people. At first, I thought I would miss them, the noise of family dinners, the comfort of having people around, even the chaos of their demands. But as the days passed, I realized I didn't miss any of it. What I missed was the version of me I had buried. The version of me that wasn't defined by my family's expectations. The version that still had dreams, that still had a sense of who she was before I became the dutiful daughter who always did everything for everyone else. It wasn't easy. In the beginning, I felt like a stranger to myself. Without the constant need to support or take care of others, I didn't know who I was. I had spent so long putting everyone else's needs above my own that I didn't know what it meant to live for myself. I spent the first few days organizing, cleaning, and trying to settle in, but there were moments when I just sat there, paralyzed by the weight of my thoughts. I had spent so much of my life avoiding conflict, keeping the peace, that now, with no one else to answer to, I had to learn how to make decisions on my own. One evening, I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the empty space. There was no one to tell me how to arrange the furniture, no one to offer suggestions, no one to criticize. This apartment was my blank canvas, but as I stood there, I realized that it wasn't just about furniture. It was about my life. I was rebuilding from scratch, but there was no blueprint. I had to make my own way, and that terrified me. It wasn't just the big decisions that challenged me, it was the small things too. Cooking dinner for one, getting used to the quiet, going to the grocery store without anyone to talk to. The loneliness sometimes crept in, making me question whether I had made the right choice. But slowly, I began to realize that the quiet wasn't a punishment. It was a gift. I had spent so many years drowning out my own voice to listen to others that I had forgotten what it felt like to listen to myself. I started setting small goals for myself. I cleaned up my finances, something I had put off for too long, trying to untangle the mess of bills and accounts that had accumulated over the years. I signed up for a yoga class to help center myself, to create a space for my own physical and mental well-being. I began reading books I had once put aside, stories that ignited something in me, something I had forgotten was there. I also started making new friends. It wasn't easy. I had always been more comfortable being the background character in other people's stories, the one who quietly supported and listened. But now, I realized that I had to learn how to be more than just the caretaker. I had to learn how to connect with others on my own terms. I met a woman named Carla at the yoga class who had an easygoing, genuine energy. She invited me to lunch one day, and I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't opened up to anyone in years. She told me about her struggles with family, how she had walked away from her own toxic relationships, and for the first time, I felt seen. Carla wasn't the only person who showed up for me. There was Tom from work, who asked if I wanted to grab a coffee one afternoon. It wasn't a life-changing moment, but it was the first time in a long time that someone reached out to me without any agenda. It made me realize how much I had been missing simple human connection without the strings attached, without the expectations. As the weeks went by, I began to find a rhythm. The loneliness didn't go away, but it became something I could manage. There were still hard days, days when the weight of the past would creep back in, but I was learning how to sit with those feelings instead of running from them. I was learning how to trust myself, how to validate my own worth, and how to make decisions without seeking approval from anyone else. One afternoon, I was sitting in a cafe, sipping my coffee and watching people pass by. When I realized something, I was okay. More than okay, I was thriving. This was my life now, and I was no longer waiting for anyone's permission to live it. I was no longer trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. The person I had been broken, used, silenced, was starting to fade away, and in her place, someone new was emerging. Someone strong, someone who knew her worth, someone who didn't need anyone's approval to feel valid. It was a quiet moment of triumph, but it was mine. I had taken the first steps toward creating the life I had always wanted, the life I had never been allowed to have. I didn't need my family to see me, to approve of me. I had already found my worth, and that was more than enough. It had been months since I left my family behind, and as I settled further into my new life, I thought I was starting to find peace. The quiet mornings, the little victories at work, and the growing friendships I had made in the neighborhood felt like steps toward the life I had always deserved. But the weight of the family betrayal of Elijah's manipulation and financial deceit still clung to me, even in my moments of contentment. I was beginning to think that maybe I could move on, leave the past behind, and start truly living without looking back. But one phone call changed all that. It was Ruth. I hadn't heard from her in a while, not since the day I told her about Elijah's betrayal and my decision to cut ties with the family. Ruth had always been a source of comfort, the only person in my family who understood the magnitude of what I was going through. She had distanced herself from Elijah long before I did, having seen the same manipulative tendencies I had come to recognize in him. Still, hearing her voice again stirred a mix of emotions inside me. "Debbie," Ruth said when I picked up the phone, "I've been thinking about what you told me, about Elijah, the trust, and everything he's done. I think it's time to take action. You need to file a lawsuit." The words hit me like a tidal wave. A lawsuit? I had never imagined taking that step. The idea of exposing my family's darkest secrets in court, making everything public, felt overwhelming. But Ruth was firm in her conviction. "You're not the only one he's hurt, you know," Ruth continued, her voice steady but filled with the same fire I had always admired. "He's been doing this for years, and it's time someone held him accountable. You deserve justice, Debbie. You deserve to be heard, and I'll be with you every step of the way." I took a deep breath, feeling a familiar knot form in my chest. Part of me recoiled at the thought of confronting Elijah in such a public way. I had already severed ties with my family. Was I ready to take it further? Was I ready to bring all of Elijah's manipulation into the light? But then I thought about everything that had happened, everything I had sacrificed, the years of being overlooked, the trust that had been taken from me, and the lie that my family had lived. My life had been twisted by their actions for too long. I had spent so many years being silenced, walking on eggshells, hoping for approval that never came. The truth deserved to be told. And if it meant fighting for justice, for the truth, then I had to face this fear. "I'm ready," I said, surprising even myself with the strength in my voice. "Let's do it." Over the following weeks, Ruth and I began gathering everything. We needed to move forward. Ruth was a whirlwind of determination. She helped me sift through old bank statements, financial documents, and family records. The evidence of Elijah's fraud was undeniable, but even with that proof, I knew it wasn't going to be easy. The emotional toll of confronting my father in such a public way weighed heavily on me. I had already been through so much cutting ties, facing the truth, starting over, and now I was about to rip open the wounds I had tried to bury. The paperwork was exhausting. I spent hours at Ruth's house, going through old files, signing documents, and meeting with the lawyer she had recommended. The legal jargon was overwhelming, and the prospect of facing my family in court was terrifying. Every time I thought about it, the anxiety crept back in. Would Elijah twist the truth? Would Nathan take his side? Would my family see me as a traitor, a person who had exposed their dirty laundry for the world to see? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had no choice. I couldn't keep running from the truth, and I couldn't let my father's actions go unchallenged. Elijah had used me for years, manipulating me into believing that I owed him, that my role in the family was to give and give, expecting nothing in return. But it was time to stop playing the victim. It was time to take control. I spent sleepless nights agonizing over the decision. A part of me still clung to the hope that my family could heal, that somehow I could fix things. But the truth was, that hope was a lie. My family was broken, and I wasn't the one who had broken it. Elijah had poisoned everything. He had robbed me of my sense of self, my dignity, and my worth, and the only way to heal was to stand up for myself, to demand justice. The day of the hearing arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I had spent weeks preparing, but nothing could prepare me for the moment I would have to face Elijah in a courtroom, with all of his lies and manipulations laid bare for everyone to see. Ruth was with me, of course, and she was a steady presence by my side. I had learned so much from her, not just about the legal process, but about strength, about standing up for what is right, no matter how difficult it may be. When we arrived at the courthouse, I could feel the tension building in my chest. The weight of my family's betrayal hung over me like a storm cloud, threatening to break at any moment. I glanced over at Ruth, who gave me a reassuring nod. "You're doing the right thing," she said quietly. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore." I nodded, taking a deep breath as we walked through the doors. The courtroom was sterile, filled with a mix of professionals and spectators. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my palms clammy as I sat down at the table. Elijah wasn't there yet, but I knew he would show up eventually. I wasn't sure what to expect, whether he would deny everything or try to paint me as the villain. But the thought of him dismissing me again, of him trying to manipulate the truth, made me sick to my stomach. When Elijah finally entered the room, I had to take a moment to steady myself. He was calm, his usual smug smile in place, as if nothing had changed. But I could see it in his eyes. He was scared. He knew what was coming, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had the upper hand. As the case unfolded, I could feel the emotional strain wearing me down. Every document I presented, every piece of evidence we uncovered, seemed to chip away at the facade Elijah had built. But still, I struggled with the idea of exposing my family, of dragging their secrets into the light. It felt like I was ripping apart the last piece of my old life. But by the end of the hearing, when the judge reviewed the evidence, I felt a quiet, undeniable sense of triumph. This wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming my voice, about standing up for what was right, and about finding justice for all the years I had spent being overlooked, used, and manipulated. This was the first real step toward healing. The weight of my family's betrayal had been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The courtroom felt heavy, but this time, it wasn't the weight of family secrets bearing down on me. It was the anticipation of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: hope. The judge's verdict came down swiftly, almost like a breath of fresh air after years of suffocating in the lies and manipulation of my family. Elijah and Nathan were held accountable for their actions. Elijah for siphoning funds from the family trust, and Nathan for his passive complicity in everything that had happened. The financial trust was restored, and for once, there was a sense of justice. But as I sat there, listening to the final words of the judge, I didn't feel the surge of victory that I had expected. I thought I would feel a sense of satisfaction, of triumph over the people who had wronged me for so long. But what I felt instead was a quiet peace, a sense of closure that I hadn't known I needed. The reality of it all hit me. I had won, but it wasn't the victory I had imagined. I hadn't done this to punish them. I had done it for me. As the gavel came down, signaling the end of the trial, I sat back in my chair and took a deep breath. I hadn't been seeking revenge. What I had been searching for, all these months, was justice. But now that it had been delivered, I realized that justice wasn't about seeing them pay for their mistakes. It was about reclaiming my own life, my own peace, and my own sense of self-worth. Elijah and Nathan had faced the consequences of their actions, but their downfall didn't bring me the satisfaction I thought it would. I had spent so much of my life wishing for their validation, wishing for them to see me for who I truly was. I had spent years chasing their approval, always feeling like I wasn't good enough. But in the courtroom, I finally realized that their approval didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I had learned to see myself. I had learned to value myself without needing them to acknowledge my worth. The years of emotional neglect, the manipulation, the betrayal, none of it had defined me. I had let their treatment shape me for so long, but not anymore. I was done living in the shadow of their expectations. The person I had always been was finally free to step into the light. Walking out of the courthouse felt different this time. There was no lingering sadness, no bitterness, no need for vengeance. There was only freedom. For the first time in years, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had walked away from a toxic family dynamic, and now I was walking into a new chapter of my life, one where I could finally breathe without suffocating under their expectations. I had learned something invaluable over the past few months. Family isn't just about blood, it's about respect. The people who truly love you don't treat you like a tool to be used, a pawn to be manipulated. The people who love you stand by you, see you for who you are, and support you. My real family wasn't the one I had been born into. My real family was the one I had created, with the people who respected me, valued me, and saw my worth for what it truly was. As I walked through the doors of the courthouse, I realized I didn't need to prove my worth to anyone. Not to Elijah, not to Nathan, and certainly not to anyone who had ever made me feel small. I had spent too much time trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. Now, I was creating my own path, and for the first time, I felt confident in who I was and where I was going. The journey wasn't easy, and I still had work to do, healing, rebuilding, and learning to live for myself. But I was finally on the right track. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. The woman I had become was strong, independent, and free from the shackles of my family's neglect. This was my life now, and it was mine to live on my own terms. If you've ever felt overlooked, mistreated, or like you were never truly seen by the people you love, then this story is for you. Debbie's journey is one of healing, strength, and finally standing up for yourself. If you can relate to her experience, don't keep it to yourself. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Like, comment, and let me know how you've taken control of your own life, or if you're still struggling to break free. Your voice matters, and by sharing, you help others find their strength too. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about taking control of your life and finding your true power. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. Let's support each other together. We can all rise.